Fort Regal was the kind of town that only existed because the railroad had to stop somewhere. 3 saloons, a telegraph office with a broken key, a general store that smelled of pine tar and old grief, and a sheriff who spent more time polishing his badge than using it. Dust was the town's true currency. It settled on every surface, every ambition, every sorrow, and it never truly left, not even after rain. Elena Voss had ridden into Fort Regal 6 years ago on a gray mare with a cracked saddle and a carpet bag containing exactly 4 things: a Colt revolver, a book of Spanish poetry, a deed to 40 acres of scrubland 7 miles east, and a folded letter she never let anyone read. She had built a cattle operation on those 40 acres through stubbornness, drought, and 2 terrible winters that killed off half the herd and all her sentimentality. Now she was the largest independent landowner in the county, and the men in Fort Regal had learned, some the easy way, some the hard, to step aside when she walked through a door. She was not beautiful in the way that men in this territory like to celebrate. She was striking, sharp jaw, dark eyes that missed very little, hands that were equally comfortable holding a ledger or a fence post. She wore her dark hair pinned simply, always the same, and she dressed in practical riding clothes that made the women of the merchant class purse their lips. She did not care. She had stopped caring about the opinions of people who had never survived a hard winter sometime around year 2. The governor's ball was announced on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, Elena had already received 3 separate warnings that Prince Callum, the visiting European dignitary whose grand tour of the American territories had somehow ended up improbably in Fort Regal, had taken a very particular interest in her land. And in her, or so people said. Elena had taken both pieces of information with the same stillness she applied to everything. She had simply saddled her horse and ridden the fence line, thinking. The prince and the promise he never made aloud. Prince Callum of the House of Aldemir was not what Elena had expected. She had braced herself for pomp, for a man draped in medals, trailing servants, speaking in the slow, over-enunciated English of someone who believed the whole world was slightly hard of hearing. Instead, she found a man of lean build and watchful eyes, who laughed too quickly at things that weren't funny and went very quiet at things that were. He wore no medals. He wore dust on his boots just like everyone else. They had been introduced at the Halverson dinner 3 weeks before the ball, a stiff affair in the banker's dining room, white tablecloths, too many forks, venison that had been cooked into submission. Callum had been seated across from Elena by accident or design. She never learned which. And he had spent the first 20 minutes asking her questions about land management with a directness that surprised her. Not flattery. Genuine curiosity. She had answered plainly, because plain answers were the only kind she kept. What followed over the next 2 weeks was harder to name. Rides along her eastern fence line, where he asked questions and she answered them. A shared supper at the station hotel, which the town noticed and catalogued immediately. A conversation late on her porch about the particular quality of silence in wide open places, how it was different from the silence in cities, which was merely the absence of sound, while out here silence was a presence, something with weight and temperature. In my country, he had said, silence means someone is hiding something. Out here, it seems to mean the opposite. Out here, she had replied, it means you're finally listening. She had not let herself name what was forming. She was not a woman who named things before they were certain. But she noticed she was sleeping less, and she noticed she did not particularly mind. What she did not know, what no one in Fort Regal thought to tell her, or perhaps thought she already knew, was that Lady Margot Fontaine had arrived by private rail car 4 days ago, and that Lady Margot Fontaine and Prince Callum had a history that did not require introduction. Elena did not own a ball gown. She had never needed one, and had never wanted one, and had, on at least 2 occasions, actively refused gifts of such items from women who considered it their civic duty to improve her. But the governor's ball was a formal affair. The Queen's own representative would be present, a formality that sat awkwardly in a town whose highest architectural achievement was the water tower. And so Elena had commissioned something from the seamstress on Depot Street. Something practical, she had specified. Something she could breathe in. What arrived was a dress of deep charcoal silk with a structured bodice, and a skirt cut narrow enough for movement. No excess fabric, no decorative nonsense. It fit her the way good tack fit a good horse, precisely, without apology. She looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand and saw something she hadn't seen in a while. Not beauty. Readiness. She pinned her hair up. She put on her mother's earrings, small garnets, the color of dried blood, unpretentious. She checked the Colt out of habit, found it loaded as she'd left it, and set it on the dresser. She would not bring it tonight. She thought about it for a moment. Then she put it in the small bag she was carrying, under a folded handkerchief. Just the shape of it helped her breathe. Her foreman, Diego, was waiting with the wagon. He looked at her once, said nothing, and clicked the horses forward. Diego had worked for her for 4 years and had mastered the art of saying very large things with very small gestures. The single look he gave her said, "You look formidable. Be careful. Come back whole." She nodded once. They drove in silence all the way to the Regal House ballroom, where the light was already spilling gold through the tall windows, and the sound of a string quartet drifted out into the warm night air like something from another world entirely. The Regal House ballroom had been transformed into something that Fort Regal had no business being. Crystal hung from the rafters. The rough plank floors were covered in imported rugs. Candles burned in sconces that the hotel had clearly rented from somewhere east of the Mississippi. The effect was of a saloon trying to remember a dream it had once had about Vienna, and almost pulling it off. Elena entered at 8:15. She was announced by no one, which suited her. She found a glass of wine, assessed the room in 30 seconds, the way she assessed any terrain, and located Callum almost immediately. He was near the far window in a circle of dignitaries, wearing a dark coat that fit him well, talking animatedly about something that was making the governor laugh. He caught her eye across the room. He smiled. She nodded once. She expected him to cross the room. He did not cross the room. The orchestra began the first waltz. Elena turned to find the banker's eldest son at her elbow, asking politely if she would dance. She declined pleasantly, watching from the edge of the floor as couples arranged themselves. She watched Callum extend his hand to a woman in pale gold, a woman who had apparently materialized from the general direction of wealth and continental Europe, and lead her onto the floor. Lady Margot Fontaine danced the way she had clearly been trained to dance, perfectly, deliberately, with the practiced ease of someone who understood that public performance was its own form of territory. She was beautiful in an architectural way, everything placed precisely. She laughed at something Callum said, and the laugh carried across the room, even over the music, designed to carry. Elena did not move. She held her wine glass and watched them complete the waltz with the same expression she used when she was reading a legal document, attentive, gathering information, giving nothing away. She noted that Callum did not look for her during the dance. She noted this the way she noted any important fact, fully, without flinching, and without yet deciding what to do with it. By the third waltz, the room had noticed. Fort Regal was a small place, and its residents had the highly developed social radar of people who lived in small places. They tracked everything, cataloged everything, discussed everything in the particular low murmur that passed for discretion in the territory. Elena could feel the awareness gathering around her like weather. She said nothing. She spoke to the postmaster's wife about the coming dry season. She accepted a second glass of wine she did not particularly want. She watched Callum lead Lady Margot through the second waltz and the third, and then stand beside her between dances with the easy familiarity of a man in his own drawing room. It was during the fourth waltz that Elena excused herself and moved toward the back corridor that led to the veranda. She needed outside air and 30 seconds of no one looking at her. She got about halfway down the corridor before she heard the voices from the small anteroom, the door not quite shut, the sound traveling clearly in the still air of the hallway. Lady Margot's voice, precise, unhurried, completely certain of itself. "The land arrangement is already in motion, darling. The deed transfer goes through the governor's office next week. The Voss woman simply doesn't know yet." A pause. Then Callum's voice, lower, harder to read. "You're certain the claim is valid?" "Certain enough. A woman alone on 40 acres in contested territory. The legal challenges write themselves." The point is that by the time she has the resources to fight it, the season will have broken her financially anyway. Another pause. Callum said something Elena couldn't catch. Then Lady Margot laughed, the same laugh, the one that carried. Don't be sentimental. You were charming to her. She served her purpose. Now let the lawyers do what lawyers are paid to do. Elena stood in the corridor for exactly 4 seconds. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. There was no hot rush of betrayal, no collapse of breath. What she felt instead was a cold, crystalline clarity, the particular sensation she associated with the moment a fence post finally found solid ground after too much loose soil. Everything settled. Everything became simple. She turned and walked back toward the ballroom. Elena did not go back to the ballroom immediately. She went first to find Diego. He was outside with the wagon, as she knew he would be, sharing tobacco with 2 other drivers in the yard. She crossed to him without hurrying. She told him, in a voice pitched for him alone, what she had heard. Quickly, cleanly, no drama. Diego listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she valued most about him. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then asked 2 questions. How long do we have? And who else needs to know tonight? She told him. He nodded once, stood, and went to do the things that needed doing. Elena trusted him to do them. She had earned that trust the hard way over 4 years, which was the only way trust meant anything. Then she went back inside. What she needed now was not a confrontation. Confrontations were for people who hadn't thought ahead. What she needed was a witness, a timeline, and 30 minutes. The governor's ball was full of witnesses. The telegraph office on Depot Street, whose broken key she happened to know her own foreman had quietly repaired 2 months ago, a favor never called in, was 4 minutes from the Regal house at a fast walk. And her land lawyer in the county seat, a small fierce woman named Mirabelle Cross, who slept 4 hours a night and answered telegraphs at any hour, was 300 miles away, but as close as a wire. She re-entered the ballroom as the 4th waltz concluded. She found the postmaster, who was the second most important person in Fort Regal after the telegraph operator, and told him she needed to send an urgent message tonight. He looked at her, read something in her face, and said he would arrange it personally. The postmaster was one of those people who recognized the edge of significant events and had the sense to get on the right side of them early. That left 20 minutes. Elena refilled her wine glass, smiled at 3 people she passed, and took a position near the windows where she could see the entire room. The orchestra was arranging itself for the 5th waltz. Callum had returned to the floor. Lady Margot was on his arm. Elena watched them and thought about her 40 acres, the eastern pasture that flooded in spring but grew the richest grass in summer, the ridge where the fence posts had to go in at an angle because of the rock shelf, the creek that ran cold and clear all year and had kept her cattle alive through the second terrible winter when every other rancher's animals were dying. She thought about all of this with great steadiness, and she waited. Elena did not go back to the ballroom immediately. She went first to find Diego. He was outside with the wagon, as she knew he would be, sharing tobacco with 2 other drivers in the yard. She crossed to him without hurrying. She told him, in a voice pitched for him alone, what she had heard. Quickly, cleanly, no drama. Diego listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she valued most about him. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then asked 2 questions. How long do we have? And who else needs to know tonight? She told him. He nodded once, stood, and went to do the things that needed doing. Elena trusted him to do them. She had earned that trust the hard way over 4 years, which was the only way trust meant anything. Then she went back inside. What she needed now was not a confrontation. Confrontations were for people who hadn't thought ahead. What she needed was a witness, a timeline, and 30 minutes. The governor's ball was full of witnesses. The telegraph office on Depot Street, whose broken key she happened to know her own foreman had quietly repaired 2 months ago, a favor never called in, was 4 minutes from the Regal house at a fast walk. And her land lawyer in the county seat, a small fierce woman named Mirabelle Cross, who slept 4 hours a night and answered telegraphs at any hour, was 300 miles away, but as close as a wire. She re-entered the ballroom as the 4th waltz concluded. She found the postmaster, who was the second most important person in Fort Regal after the telegraph operator, and told him she needed to send an urgent message tonight. He looked at her, read something in her face, and said he would arrange it personally. The postmaster was one of those people who recognized the edge of significant events and had the sense to get on the right side of them early. That left 20 minutes. Elena refilled her wine glass, smiled at 3 people she passed, and took a position near the windows where she could see the entire room. The orchestra was arranging itself for the 5th waltz. Callum had returned to the floor. Lady Margot was on his arm. Elena watched them and thought about her 40 acres, the eastern pasture that flooded in spring but grew the richest grass in summer, the ridge where the fence posts had to go in at an angle because of the rock shelf, the creek that ran cold and clear all year and had kept her cattle alive through the second terrible winter when every other rancher's animals were dying. She thought about all of this with great steadiness, and she waited. She did not look for Callum as she crossed the ballroom toward the door. She was aware of where he was, near the punch table, Lady Margot at his side, both of them in conversation with the governor's deputy. In the peripheral, automatic way, she was always aware of the positions of relevant things in a space. She did not turn her head toward him. She did not give him the acknowledgement of her attention, which was the only acknowledgement that cost her something. She passed the banker and his wife without pausing. She passed the postmaster, and to him she gave a single small nod. "Thank you, it's done, no need to speak of it." And he received it with an equally small inclination of his head. She passed 3 women from the merchant district who had spent 6 years being puzzled by her, and she gave them nothing but the space she occupied as she moved through it. At the door she stopped once, not because she hesitated, but because the night air hit her face, and it was cooler than she expected and good, genuinely good. The way wide open air always was after a room full of people and performance and the particular exhausting work of being watched. Diego had the wagon waiting at the edge of the yard. He always had the wagon waiting. This was why she trusted him with everything. She climbed up without speaking. He clicked the horses forward. They drove back to the ranch in the same silence they had driven in arriving, but a different quality of silence, the kind with solid ground under it. She sent the full accounting wire from the ranch's own telegraph connection at 11 that night. Mirabelle Cross replied in 40 minutes with confirmation and 3 sharp legal questions that Elena answered in sequence. By 1 in the morning she had a documented record, a legal hold filed in the county seat, and a copy of the correspondence chain-sealed and left with the postmaster, who had ridden out to collect it without being asked, because he understood what was happening and had, after all, chosen his side. She slept 4 hours. Clear, deep sleep, no interruption. At dawn she was already on horseback, riding the eastern fence line, the same fence line she had ridden when she first heard about the ball, when everything was still forming and unnamed. The sun came up flat and gold over the ridge, the way it always did, indifferent to balls and princes and legal instruments and the small decisive actions of people who refused to be moved. The creek ran cold at the base of the eastern pasture. Her cattle were already moving toward the water in the unhurried morning way of cattle that are well kept and know it. 3 days later, a message arrived from Dame Hargrove's office in the territorial capital. It was brief and formal and entirely sufficient. The Crown's letter of administrative support for the tour had been reviewed and its scope clarified. No governmental instrument associated with the royal visit could be used to facilitate private land disputes. Any such attempt would be investigated as an abuse of diplomatic process. Lady Margot Fontaine departed Fort Regal by private railcar on the 4th morning. Prince Callum sent a letter the same day, 3 pages, careful handwriting, more explanations than she had asked for, and fewer answers than she needed. She read it once. She noted what was in it and what was absent. She folded it precisely and set it aside with the same neutral efficiency she used for documents that were no longer actionable.